My name is Michael Zwirling. I'm the proud owner of KSCO News Talk AM 1080 and FM 104.1 in Santa Cruz, California, a place where there are more characters per square inch than anywhere on the planet. It was a lifelong dream for me to own this station from the time I was a high school kid. And in 1991, 25 years ago, I was able to realize that lifelong dream. But be careful what you wish for, because even though I was so passionate about running a radio station that serves the community, we did a very good job of serving the community. But guess what? It didn't pay financially. It was almost impossible to sell enough advertising to pay what it costs to run a radio operation like this. And that's why you won't find a talk radio station anywhere in the country or probably in the world that's anything like KSCO. I'm going to share with you the secret of our success and longevity. For the last 25 years, we have been able to do almost the impossible. And that is because I joined a company called Longevity, founded by Dr. Joel Wallach, an absolutely amazing person. I'm very proud to present the following video presentation that has just blown me away. Dr. Wallach has a message that everybody needs to see, and I want to share it with you starting right now. This is about your health and longevity.
Hello, I'm Dr. Joel Wallach, and we're here to talk about health and longevity today. And the thing that makes my view different is that I have a degree in agriculture. I'm a veterinarian. I wrote the first paper on a mass die-off from pollution in America, 1961. I am a comparative pathologist, and I've done 20,000 autopsies, 17,000 some change, over 454 species of animals and 3,000 humans. This was for the Center for the Biology of Natural Systems, a composite of Washington University, St. Louis, the St. Louis Zoo, and the Shaw's Botanical Gardens. And I also have a degree, a postdoctoral fellowship in comparative pathology, which is the equivalent of a PhD in comparative pathology. And I'm a primary care physician. Since 1982, I've been licensed as a primary care physician and naturopathic physician from Oregon. I've been licensed in Oregon, and I'm also licensed in California, again, as a primary care physician. And of course, this gives me a different view on things. What you're going to see here in this presentation is why we're in trouble. Why our children are going to die before we do. They're going to be the first generation Americans who do not live as long as their parents. Why our food is depleted of nutrients has nothing to do with pollution, and we have a real problem here. And what you're going to find is we're going to give you solutions, and we can all win this game together, but everybody's going to have to be obsessive about making these things happen. So here we go. And of course, you're seeing here some of the various awards I've won. So it gives me a little credibility. And I graduated agricultural school at the University of Missouri. I graduated veterinary school at the University of Missouri. And before graduating veterinary school, I actually started taking courses in pathology. And this is me getting an award at the United Nations for Natural Medicine, Lifetime Achievement Award for Natural Medicine and Philanthropy. And the ambassador on the right side of your picture is this wonderful lady. She's the ambassador from Nepal, and the gentleman on your left is the ambassador from Dubai, the UAE, the United Arab Emirates. And this is off the stage after receiving the award. This was kind of the red carpet thing. And this is me in 2011 getting the Klaus Schwarz Award for trace mineral research in the prevention and reversal of birth defects. And most of you have heard or read the audio cassette tape, the CD, or the book, Dead Doctors Don't Lie. The CD is in 12 different languages all over the world, and it's sold over 300 million copies. We're very, very proud of that. Obviously, somebody's interested in the message. Now, this is a word cloud, and it's just going to be a brief introduction to some of the concepts we're talking about before we get into the details so you know where we're going. I want you to look in the upper right-hand corner, and you'll notice it says obesity. The prevailing theory for 100 years on obesity has been obesity is caused by eating too much and lack of exercise. Well, we followed that theory for 100 years, and what did we get? We're the #1 obese nation in the world. It's a failed theory. Basically, being overweight and obese is really due to a deficiency of a certain group of nutrients, and if any one of them are missing, you're going to start gaining some weight. There are several of those nutrients in that group. If you're missing them, you're going to weigh 400, 600, 800 pounds. And so obesity can be gotten rid of very quickly, but you have to supplement with these nutrients, and then the cravings, the munchies, the binge eating goes away very simply. You can lose a half pound to 2 pounds a day, and we'll talk more about that in detail in a moment. The red rectangle just below obesity has the word Alzheimer's in it. Alzheimer's disease is certainly not caused by eating aluminum or being in contact with aluminum deodorant. We're looking at a disease that's a physician-caused disease. Alzheimer's disease is a physician-caused disease. Not caused by aluminum, absolutely not genetic. It's a simple nutritional deficiency disease driven by doctors telling people to do things, telling their patients to give up cholesterol and saturated fat. It's a cholesterol deficiency. We'll talk more about this in a moment. Then there's cardiovascular disease. This is probably one of the biggest hoaxes because it's proactive. It's, in other words, it was consciously done to sell another product. And this is where Procter & Gamble, to make a long story short, ultimately bought the patents for a substance that was used as a submarine diesel engine lubricant, a smokeless lubricant originally. And after the war, they didn't need it as a submarine diesel engine lubricant anymore. And so Procter & Gamble wound up with it, and they were going to sell it as soap, and they couldn't sell it as soap because people were making their own soap. And they decided to use it as a shortening for cooking, but they had to demonize what Grandma had been using for centuries, and that is lard, butter, cream, and eggs for cooking. And what they did, again, to make a long story short, through Ansel Keys, who was on the board of Procter & Gamble and also on the board of the American Heart Association, he brokered a deal in which the Procter & Gamble gave a $1.7 million grant to the American Heart Association in exchange for an endorsement of this diesel lubricant as a replacement for lard, butter, cream, and demonization of cholesterol and saturated fat. Also, they came up with the idea of the Mediterranean diet to sort of make it more sexy to give those things up, the Mediterranean diet, and it's turned out that these are all false things. We'll talk about that more in a minute in detail. But basically, congestive heart failure, one of the more common causes of heart disease in adults all over the industrialized world, is due to a deficiency of a single vitamin. We've known that for 300 years. It was proposed by a Japanese naval surgeon 300 years ago. Cardiomyopathy heart disease, I'm very familiar with that. It's a deficiency of a single mineral. And you see this resulting in sudden deaths in athletes or sudden deaths in people who do hard physical work. I've actually done 1,700 autopsies on kids under the age of 10 that have died of this one in Qishan province, China. It's a deficiency of a single mineral, has nothing to do with cholesterol or saturated fat. Then there's coronary artery disease. That has nothing to do with saturated fat or cholesterol. Coronary artery disease, and I said this in 1971 after doing 20,000 autopsies on the big NIH project with the Center for the Center of Disease Control and also for the Center of the Biological Systems. And it's one of those things where this was a joint project between Washington University in St. Louis, the St. Louis Zoo, and the Botanical Gardens, Shaw's Botanical Gardens, and Marlin Perkins, and Barry Commoner. Those two guys put this together and brought me back from Africa. I was doing research and conservation work with the white rhino and the African elephant. Came back for 2 years after that project and began to do these autopsies. 17,000 some change of over, 454 species of animals and 3,000 humans. And the 1,200-page book that came out of that is in the Smithsonian Institute. And the bottom line of this finding of this 10-year project was that every animal and every human being who dies of what we would call natural causes dies of a nutritional deficiency disease, not pollution and certainly not genetic. So it was kind of a surprise to everybody, but that's what the study showed, and everybody agreed with the research. And so coronary artery disease, again, is not caused by cholesterol or saturated fat. It's actually caused by inflammation, which was said in that book, which is in the Smithsonian Institute. And it's caused by inflammation, caused by eating inflammatory foods, fried foods, processed meats, oils, yes, oils, and gluten, wheat, barley, rye, and oats. And then there's coronary thrombosis. One of my 9 lawsuits against the FDA in federal court, and we won the ability to say that coronary thrombosis is not caused by cholesterol and saturated fat, but is caused by actually a deficiency of omega-3 essential fatty acids and are a ratio problem between omega-3, 6s, and 9s. Then you jump over to arthritis in the lower left-hand corner, and arthritis, in fact, is simply a multi-mineral and multivitamin deficiency disease. Rheumatoid arthritis has a secondary infection with mycoplasma, a bug that's easily killed in a couple of weeks with an antibiotic called minocycline, a member of the tetracycline family. Then you go straight up from arthritis in this word cloud to diabetes, and diabetes has nothing to do with genetics. is not a genetically transmitted disease. Type 2 diabetes, which makes up 98% of the diabetic population, is in fact due to a simple deficiency of a single mineral. We've known that for almost 80 years now, and of course this allows us to prevent and support the body's ability to heal itself when you have type 2 diabetes. It's one of those little miracles because an example would be if you have iron deficiency anemia, instead of wanting to just give you an iron supplement to solve the problem, medical doctors want to do a bone marrow transplant. And that's why we have such complicated procedures and treatments for diabetes when it's really a very simple mineral deficiency disease. And of course, in the beginning of time, when human beings began to record things and tell stories into their families so they get messages passed down, they believed that diseases were caused by evil spirits or things up in the universe that they had no control over. And they knew there was infectious disease. They didn't know the word infection, but they knew they were transmitted and they were very dangerous diseases. They put writings on cave walls. And these cave walls in the cave art, they had pictures of shamans treating people with infections and wounds. And then, of course, astrology is where they believed this, and we're talking about physicians now, as well as the patients, believed that people would get sick because they angered gods up in planets. And if they would sacrifice either animals or even their neighbors to these gods, they would be appeased and would look kindly upon them and let them survive through epidemics and plagues, or maybe prevent them from getting disease, or allow them to have healthy children. And in more recent times, maybe in the last 500 years, medical doctors got rid of their competition by going to churches and telling them that Grandma Ruthie was healing people with her herbs. It was really God's job to heal people and not this witch. And the church would send out inquisition committees to torture these poor grandmothers into confessing that they were a witch, and then they would burn them at the stake. And so the churches were involved in helping eliminate the competition for doctors. Doctors originally believed, in the last 1,000 years, that diseases were caused by an imbalance of different fluids in the body, the humors they called them, imbalance of the humors. And there was blood and phlegm and urine and yellow bile and black bile. And the way that they would balance them back was to use bloodletting. They put leeches on you, suck blood out, or they would just cut veins on the surface and allow a certain amount of blood to drain out. And of course, physicians killed our first president, George Washington, by bloodletting him when he had a respiratory infection. The first guy to really look at nutritional deficiencies in the Western world was a guy by the name of Schussler. And he was a hospitalist in German hospitals, and when indigent patients would die after months or longer in hospitals, he would cremate the bodies and analyze the minerals in their ashes. And then he would actually compare and relate the different mineral levels in these bodies, in the ashes, with their symptoms. And when people come in with those same symptoms, he would give them those minerals, and he would be able to cure many, many people. And these minerals became known as Schussler's cell salts. We're talking about magnesium and phosphorus, sodium, sulfur, silica, calcium, phosphorus, I said, iron, and potassium. All of these things were given, and people would get cured. So Schussler is one of the first ones to point to mineral deficiencies as possible causes of certain diseases. The FDA moved from the 7 food group pyramid to the plate. Now, their mantra has been to the general public, just eat well, you get everything you need, eat plenty of dark fruits and vegetables to get antioxidants, and also eat the 4 food groups. You're going to get everything you need. Don't supplement, you could overdose. And this has been a terrible, terrible, terrible event in humanity's development because, as you will see in a moment, you cannot get everything you need just by eating foods of different colors and eating well. Pharmaceuticals got started with patent medicines, of course. We're talking about Professor Smith's or Dr. Frank's liver tonic, which was usually whiskey that they had homebrewed. And one of the first ones here in America was a German fellow by the name of Baer, actually saw people relieving their pain and their suffering by chewing on white willow bark. And he made an alcohol extract of it, a tincture, if you will, and dried out and got a powder, made a pill out of it, and called it Baer aspirin. It was able to relieve pain. That was one of the first over-the-counter, truly what we would call an over-the-counter drug today. Coca-Cola was also one of the first pharmaceuticals. It was actually cocaine to begin with. It was a cocaine in a liquid form, Coca-Cola. And when it became necessary to pull the cocaine out of it because it became a prescription item, what we have here is they would put caffeine from coffee into the Coca-Cola, and they carbonated it and made it something that everybody could drink in the little drugstores. Before there was Prozac for depression, medical doctors would write prescriptions for cigarettes for depression. And when it became known that smoking tobacco or chewing tobacco increased the risk of lung cancer and mouth cancer, oral cancer, and so forth, everybody sued the tobacco companies, and the medical doctors got a walk. They were writing prescriptions for 30, 40 years for tobacco. They were the ones who were intimately involved in causing lung cancer, but nobody ever sued a doctor for that because everybody went to the deep pockets of the pharmaceutical companies, which were at that time the tobacco companies. Hospitals overcharge people by as much as 1,000% in modern times. 85% of all personal bankruptcies are due to medical bills. 85% of all personal bankruptcies are due to medical bills. It's a very, very scary prospect when you think about it. And most of the debt in America and other industrialized nations comes from medical bills. People think they're getting free medical care, but they're paying $6 a gallon gasoline in taxes to pay for the free medical care. So it's not really free. But it buys a lot of votes to say you're going to give free medical care to people if you vote for me, right? And the reason why this goes on is most people don't go through their statements that come in from the insurance companies. And when the statements come, they just look at the insurance statement, they throw it in the drawer without opening it. And so nobody noticed that hospitals are charging insurance companies $500 for a single rubber glove and so on. And they continue to get away with it. The number of Americans using 5 or more drugs nearly doubles, okay? 59% of American adults are on prescription drugs. 59%. This is very, very scary. This is legal drug dealing is what it amounts to. And of course, most prescription drugs, with the exception of antibiotics, do not cure anything. With the exception of antibiotics, which do cure infections, things like bacterial meningitis, bacterial pneumonia, abscesses, bacterial intestinal infections, and so forth. But other than antibiotics, there's not a single drug that cures anything. They all treat symptoms. They all relieve symptoms. Some of them do a very good job. Some of them have terrible side effects, including death. Death rates rising for middle-aged white Americans. Okay, this just came out, you can see, November 2015. And the death rates were rising for middle-aged white Americans while declining for other wealthy countries and among other races and ethnic groups. The rise appears to be driven by suicide, drugs, and alcohol abuse. But when you look at these people who are committing suicide and who are abusing alcohol and drugs, these are ones who have 6, 8, 10, 12, 15 terrible diseases, degenerative diseases, chronic diseases, making their lives miserable, and none of the drugs they're taking are helping them. They're driven to look for something that's going to give them relief. Here's one guy who kind of overdid it, and when you start billing for one patient $5 million a month for drug therapy for cancer they didn't have, well, he got his hand caught in the cookie jar, put in jail for 175 years. And in fact, many, many, many more doctors should be put on trial for the same problems. When doctors don't know what you have, when they don't know what you have as far as a disease, they say you have an autoimmune disease, your body's attacking itself. That way it takes the responsibility away from them. Gosh, instead of saying, I really don't know, I have to do a little bit of research to find out. In the meantime, I'm going to give you this drug to give you some relief. They never do. They say, oh, you have an autoimmune disease, your body's attacking itself. Not much I can do for you. Or you have a genetic disease. You just have bad genes, there's not much I can do for you. Okay, it's not my fault. Well, let's have a look. CAT scans are linked to cancer because they have as much as 500 chest rays worth of radiation for one CAT scan. Even the government says use them on a limited basis. And in fact, most of the time you shouldn't even use a CAT scan. Harvard Medical School said that 20 years ago. Don't use CAT scans, okay, because of the radiation dangers. They're linked to breast cancer and other forms of death. The mammogram is not a prevention. Repeat that. Mammograms are not prevention. They also have as much as 500 chest x-rays worth of radiation in one mammogram. Why would you do that? Well, I've been going to the same OBGYN for 25 years. I really respect him, and he said I really should get a mammogram, so I did. Women should get 3 and 4 different opinions before they make choices like this. And there's other options. A high-resolution ultrasound would give you the same information without the radiation. Of course, an ultrasound, the doctor might only make $50, where in a mammogram, he might make $1,200. Now, this story in the Japanese newspapers kind of gives you the idea of what's happening here with medical care in all industrialized nations. If you notice, medical care expenses in Japan have increased from 2 trillion yen in 1970, that's 2 trillion yen a year in 1970, to 37 trillion yen a year in 2009. And in 2014, it was actually 40 trillion yen for 1 year, 2014. Well, you want to note that Japanese tax revenues in 2013 totaled, from all tax revenues, the country was 42.3 trillion. So the doctors were paid $40 trillion of that. Only $2.3 trillion was left over to do the business of the government. Now you see why governments are going bankrupt. All governments in the industrialized world are going bankrupt because of the cost of inefficient, dangerous, and ineffective medical care. Genetics is another failed theory of the 20th and 21st century. There's not a single disease that's transmitted genetically. There's not a single disease that is transmitted genetically as birth defects. All birth defects are caused by nutritional deficiency of the embryo. The concept of adults passing on information, whether you're an oak tree or a fish or a human being or a hummingbird or a crocodile, goes back to the days of Charles Darwin. People had noticed these things, but Charles Darwin was the first one to write it down. And his cousin, Francis Galton, really enjoyed what Darwin was saying in his book on the origin of species and began a little sort of pseudoscience called eugenics. And this started the entire world in a race for gathering up territory because everybody wanted to be the master race. Remember, this sort of stuff went on in the 1800s, but Hitler picked it up in the 1930s before the Second World War and took eugenics to a horrible, horrible level in which, I don't know, the Nazis killed over 40 million people who they thought weren't worthy of living, kind of like selection in farm animals. If you have one that doesn't meet your criteria for production or standards of looks, you eat them, okay? And so he was killing people who didn't meet his standards of the perfect generation. Gregor Mendel Priest was the first one to talk about things like recessive and dominance. He understood that in hybrids. He was a priest, and he found out all this information by studying pea plants and how they worked when you began to hybridize different types of pea plants. Very, very smart guy. 1800s, Louis Pasteur invented the germ theory, and he was a wine chemist, and he invented pasteurization. He would heat wine to prevent it from going to vinegar. And he knew that fermentation then was a biological process. And he also knew, once he looked through the first microscope, which was invented by a Dutch eyeglasses maker, von Leeuwenhoek, he could see yeast actually growing in fermenting wine and beer. And so he knew his biological process. He heated it and stopped the process so it didn't go to vinegar. Doctors still at the time believed that the fermentation process was a chemical process, and as a result, when you heated it, it actually went faster, sometimes explosively. 1961, I was able to find, as a graduate student, I had graduated ag school, I'm halfway through veterinary school, and taking graduate courses in pathology, found the first mass die-off in America from pollution, did the research, found out how it happened exactly, tracked all the chemistries, got it published. It was my first publication. And I gave a copy to Marlin Perkins, and this is how he was interested in me doing the autopsies in his project for the Center for the Biology of Natural Systems. Again, the founding members were the Washington University of St. Louis Zoological Garden, St. Louis Zoo, and Shaw's Botanical Gardens. Barry Commoner, okay, really a very, very smart fellow when it came to biology, and Marlin Perkins, who was one of my mentors. And he remembered that paper I had given him on the first mass die-off from pollution. And so I was in Africa working on the White Rhino Conservation Project in the African Elevation. And he sent me a letter inviting me back to work on this project with the Center for the Biology of Natural Systems, be the pathologist on the project, because I had given him this paper on pollution. And they believed that pollution was a basic root cause of diseases of natural causes. And they wanted me to do autopsies in zoo animals that lived in big zoos in the big cities of the United States. And they wanted to use the zoo animals in these big zoos in the United States as the canary in the mine, like the old Welsh coal miners would take canaries down to the mine. And if gases would leak into the mine, the canaries were more sensitive to the men, and they would drop off the perch and die long before the men were in danger, and they could get out safely. And they felt that with big zoos having 400, 500, 600 species of animals, that they could get information before we actually got hurt. And they actually froze bodies and sent them to me from zoos all over North America, Canada, United States, and Mexico for this project. This is the book that came out of it. This book, Disease of Exotic Animals, 1,200 pages, covers 20,000 autopsies, 10 million chemistries, and is in the Smithsonian Institute as a national treasure. I'm very, very proud of that work. All birth defects are caused by nutritional deficiencies during the development of the embryo. The embryo has gone down essentially an assembly line. If anything's missing that's required for the production of cells or tissues or organs, if there's something missing at that appropriate time during the first trimester of pregnancy, guess what? You're going to get a defect because something's going to be missing. By the time 1910, 1920 came along, we knew the chemical analyses, we knew the biochemistry of genes and DNA and RNA, but nobody really knew the physical structure, and so it was kind of delaying genetic engineering because nobody knew the physical structure. Well, in 1953, these two young fellows here, James Watson from the United States and Francis Crick from England, proposed a double helix. And it took 9 years. It went all the way until 1962 before the general science community agreed with him, and they got the Nobel Prize for it. At that time, James Watson was named the director of the Cold Springs Genetic Research Laboratory for the federal government in New York and Manhattan Island. And between 2003 and 2011, the human genome was mapped out. We knew every gene that's found in the human body. And 850 biotech companies were formed and spent trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars looking for screening tests that would alert us early on that a child, say 2 years old, when they're 48 is going to get Parkinson's disease, or when they're 52 are going to get breast cancer, prostate cancer, colon cancer, and they could genetically engineer the proper healthy genes, replace the bad genes, and thus eliminate the appearance of the disease later on. That was the whole idea of genetic engineering. Well, inborn errors in metabolism were thought to be genetic because people were born with these diseases, and doctors erroneously, falsely believed that they were due to genes, genetics. One of the more common ones is sickle cell anemia, primarily found in the black community as sickle cell anemia. And I was finding sickle cell anemia in deer and in antelopes and in hummingbirds. And how could a human genetic disease wind up in these animals? And so that was my question. And it turns out that this is not a genetically transmitted disease. It's called an inborn error metabolism. During early pregnancy, the 3rd to the 7th week of pregnancy, mother's missing a mineral. And what happens is the system that manufactures good hemoglobin is not correct because things were missing when it was forming. And so you get a dysfunctional hemoglobin, and under not so optimal circumstances, it will sickle. And they'll have a crisis and certainly can die from it. Now, this is in the black community. In the white community, the same disease is called thalassemia. And they call it thalassemia because you can't have a black gene in a white guy or a white gene in a black guy, so they call the same disease in two different groups, two different names. I always thought that was kind of interesting, and it began to fill in the blanks for me as a researcher doing all these autopsies. Same thing with lactose intolerance. The lactase enzyme, which is formed in the pancreas and the upper small intestine, the mechanisms for forming that enzymes are dysfunctional because mama was missing a mineral when that was forming, and so the equipment doesn't work after the baby's born. But you can supplement a lactase enzyme capsule before you go to an ice cream party. You won't be uncomfortable and embarrass yourself and so forth. Totally preventable. Same way with type 1 diabetes. It's not genetic. Type 1 diabetes is an inborn error metabolism. You're supposed to have something like 500,000 beta cells in an islet of Langerhans in which your body makes insulin. But when kids are born with type 1 diabetes, they might only have, say, 50 or 100 of these beta cells, and they have just enough insulin to squeak by when they're 3, 6, 8, 10, 12 years old, but they're going through puberty at 10 to 12. They're starting to do more physical activities, and it's not enough insulin, and so they show up as a type 1 diabetic at that point. Totally preventable, and certainly at this point, not reversible. Lipid storage disease, there's enzymes missing. What happens is as a person grows older, they get mental diseases because they're missing the enzymes that are required to move fats into cells and out of cells. So what do we have left here? Well, eugenics, of course, was Francis Galton's way of looking at it, but it's really epigenetics. Epigenetics is a science that takes the place of genetics. And notice the subtitle in the book, Epigenetics, is The Death of the Genetic Theory of Disease Transmission. That's based on facts, as you'll see here in a moment, and Black Gene Lies. Pastor Creflo Dollar from Atlanta, Georgia, and the World Changers Church, because I had helped his daughter get rid of a lifelong, terrible form of asthma, and he was told it was genetic in the black community. He was told that his daughter was not doing very well, and she was not going to make it. She wasn't responding to various medications that normally would help other kids with asthma. And so when it was said that she wasn't responding to medication, I knew immediately that she wasn't absorbing the medications, why she wasn't responding. So we put her on a gluten-free diet to increase her efficiency of absorption, got her in the 90 essential nutrients, and her asthma went away in 2 weeks because we were giving her the raw materials and she was able to absorb the raw materials for her body to make all the various hormones that are necessary to dilate the bronchi. Okay, we were able to support and promote maintenance repairs of that system. Well, he actually funded the first 100,000 copies of this book, Black Gene Lies. He said, Doc, I want you to get the information, do the research, and find all the diseases that are said to be genetic in the black community: diabetes, heart disease, cancer, Alzheimer's disease, and sickle cell anemia, and find out what's going on here and which diseases are genetic, which ones aren't, what we can do to prevent the ones that aren't, and how to cure the ones we can. And of course, all this information is in the book Black Gene Lies. High blood pressure is not genetic, even in the black population. High blood pressure is usually due to a simple mineral deficiency, or maybe when you have kidney failure, the kidneys will release a hormone called renin, R-E-N-I-N, to drive your blood pressure up to try and get more dirty blood into the filtering units. But it certainly is not a genetic thing, totally preventable, and in most cases reversible with a proper supplement program. The death of genetic theory of disease transmission. Now, James Watson, the director of the Cold Springs Genetic Research Laboratory in New York and in Manhattan Island, did not coin that phrase. I coined that phrase. Okay, but he did say that all the experiments they had done over the last 60 years in genetics had been irrelevant. You could actually, I'm quoting him now, you could actually sequence the genes of 150,000 people a day who had diseases we believed were genetically transmitted diseases, things like cancer, diabetes, sickle cell anemia, and the reason why we weren't able to deal with them was because they were genetic. Well, he said all that was irrelevant because none of those diseases are genetic. They're either a chemical problem, a chemistry problem, biochemistry problem, aka nutritional deficiencies. And I then, after he said that in public, I coined the term the death of the genetic theory of disease transmission. Remember, there's thousands of failed medical theories every century, and the 20th century and the 21st century are no different. One of the failed theories in the 20th century and 21st century is that genetics cause disease. It's not true. You can see how a human embryo develops, and if anything's missing along the way, something's wrong with the liver. They get a cleft palate, they get cerebral palsy, they get spina bifida, they get Down syndrome, all nutritional deficiencies as the embryo develops. Totally preventable in many cases, such as cystic fibrosis and muscular dystrophy. Even after the baby is born, they're reversible with supplementation because they're a biochemical problem, not a mechanical, physical problem. One of the places that doctors do good work is saving premiums. 100 years ago, a baby born 1.5 pounds, most of them didn't make it. Today, maybe 85, 90% will make it. But those 2 and 3 months in the incubators with special care is not cheap. It costs $280,000 to $500,000 per baby, whether they make it or not. And guess what? For $600 worth of supplements, you can prevent preemies. You can prevent all birth defects in babies. Down syndrome is actually caused by a deficiency of a single mineral. We've learned this in animals, and we've eliminated it in animals. And of course, 1 out of 700 babies in America are born with Down syndrome. I've been able to actually prevent and reverse Down syndrome in an embryo. The most famous one in 2.5 months of pregnancy was Lauren Knievel. Eva Knievel was a niece-in-law, and she called me, and she had an amniocentesis, and she had an ultrasound, both of which said she had a very severely afflicted Down syndrome baby. Everybody wanted to have an abortion. She didn't want to do that. She contacted me and asked if I could help her. We gave her the 90 essential nutrients, 16 minerals, 16 vitamins, 12 essential amino acids, 3 fatty acids. Gave her a little bit extra of the mineral that's missing when you have Down syndrome, and guess what? After 9-month full-term pregnancy, her baby was born perfectly normal. Now, I've done this many times since, but obviously that's the most famous family I've been dealing with, trisomy 21 or Down syndrome. Cerebral palsy is a good example of a gradient disease. Depending on how severe the deficiencies are during the development of the cerebellum, the part of the brain that actually functions to control and stimulate proper function of fine muscles, small muscles. And if you're born with a cerebellum that's the size of a tangerine, all the pieces are there, you're going to be born normal. But let's say you're born with a 10% underdevelopment. You're going to walk like Charlie Chaplin, but that might be manageable and controllable with braces and physical therapy. Let's say you're 25% underdeveloped of your cerebellum. You're going to be flopping around with your arms and legs. What's going to happen here is you will look like a classic cerebral palsy patient. If you're 50% underdeveloped, you're going to be with a wheelchair for the rest of your life because there's not enough size and function in the cerebellum to actually do the mechanical things you need for muscle function. This girl here has as much as a 90% underdeveloped, and the only thing that she could voluntarily move herself are her eyes. You notice the clamps holding her head up. You notice the shoulder clamps and harnesses holding her chest back in the chair. You can see where her legs are shackled into the chair because she had such terrible cerebral palsy that she is flopping all over like a fish out of water, and she had to be restrained in this way. This child costs $5 million a year to care for. Requires an enormous amount of care. Now, the interesting thing about this child, when she goes through puberty and cycles and gets married and has kids, she can have perfectly normal kids, even if her spouse, even if her husband has, yes, cerebral palsy, because it's not a genetic disease. They can have normal babies if they're getting all the 90 essential nutrients prior to conception. Of course, the cerebellum, the part of the brain that looks like a pomegranate that's been cut through in the backside of the brain stem, there in this picture. This is the part of the brain that's afflicted when you have cerebral palsy. The smaller it is, the more severe is cerebral palsy. There's another one of my lawsuits against the FDA and federal court, and basically what you see here is two little kids, newborns, with spina bifida. And of course, spina bifida oftentimes occurs in the lumbar area, but can occur anywhere up and down the spine. The one on the right also has a zinc deficiency. It has club feet. Spina bifida is due to a folic acid deficiency, and I'm one of the three guys who got together and actually sued the FDA, and that's why we have folic acid in prenatal vitamins to prevent spina bifida. Siamese twins are co-joined at the pelvis. These things are all caused by nutritional deficiencies during pregnancy. Here's really incomplete Siamese triplets. You see 3 sets of legs there. The complete child also has a clubbed right foot, meaning a zinc deficiency. The incomplete other part of the triplets here are just from the hips down. So you see 3 sets of legs, but the only complete child is the one bigger one you see. And all this is certainly preventable by proper supplementation prior to conception, all 90 essential nutrients. Congenital deafness is caused by deficiency of a single mineral. It's not genetic in any way, shape, or form. And doctors continue to farm agencies and programs to beg for money to find out the gene so kids won't be born deaf. If the mother takes the prenatal vitamins, preconception vitamins, and minerals prior to conception, there won't be any more children born deaf because it's a simple mineral deficiency, a single mineral deficiency. Same way with cleft palate, cleft lip, totally caused by a deficiency of a single mineral in the early stages of pregnancy when the flat disc of the embryo begins to curl up into a tube, and the tube doesn't close all at once, it closes like a zipper, so you can have a defect anywhere along the underside of that embryo, and of course this is the last stages of closing the embryo, and the zipper is the mouth and the palate. The middle and the left-hand picture are babies that have been egregiously impacted by thalidomide, a drug that was given to women for morning sickness early in pregnancy, and it interfered with zinc metabolism in the embryos and caused the loss and prevention of the production of limbs, arms and legs. A terrible, terrible thing. There's a similar thing goes on in a village in Russia where about an average of 300 kids are born there every year. There's one village. Half of them have the same defect on both sides of their body. 25% have the defect on the right side, 25% have the defect on their left side. They don't have thalidomide, but they do have a deficiency of that same mineral. And you can see where these kids were gathered together by the photographer to show they all had missing left forearms. Cute little kids, but they're all missing their left forearms. Totally preventable, while the doctors are telling them it's a genetic disease in that community. You've all heard of the Greek mythology of the Cyclops, evil giant. And here's a cycloptic kitten. Here's a cycloptic lamb. Here's a cycloptic shark. And what this tells you is when you have 3 different species here having the same problem, the same deficiency will cause cycloptic anatomy in all vertebrates. Any vertebrate that has a deficiency of this nutrient at that particular moment of the development of the embryo will wind up cycloptic, including humans. And so this is why we had that Greek mythology. There were babies born in those days with cycloptic eyes, as there is today. There's a human baby with cyclops. You can see that there's no nose between the eyes and the upper lip. The nose is above the eye. And of course, this is a very, very terrible birth defect. And most of the time when they do an ultrasound and they see this defect, the parents choose to do an abortion. Many of miscarriages are because these have low viability, these babies with a cycloptic defect, and they will be miscarried. And so I don't know what the percentage is, but it's very high of miscarried babies or cycloptic babies. When you look at animals, where we have control, not wild animals. We don't know the rate in wild animals, but in domestic animals, we have farm animals and pet animals. Is 1 in 16,000 have cycloptic anatomy. In humans, when you take in the miscarriages, is 1 in 250. Why is that? Well, that's because we supplement animals to prevent birth defects, and in human beings, you're just told to eat well. Most women will miss 2 periods before they start taking prenatal vitamins. By that time, the embryo is impacted. This single mother had 1 child born with 38 birth defects. 1 child with 38 birth defects. We're talking about spina bifida, heart defects, clubbed limbs, cerebral palsy, and she gets help financially from 38 different agencies that raises money to do research on these things. Somebody needs to go to jail here, and I would vote for the OB/GYN that managed that pregnancy. In 1977, I discovered the first non-human case of cystic fibrosis in a monkey at the Yerkes Primate Center in Atlanta, Georgia. And this was at Emory University, Grady Memorial Hospital. All the experts on their letterhead agreed that the tissues were, in fact, cystic fibrosis. And I told them it was from a non-human, a monkey, and they were all excited. Said, "Oh, we can have a laboratory animal now. We can study cystic fibrosis." Well, having already done by this time all this research with the Center for the Biology of Natural Systems, Marlin Perkins, Washington University, the St. Louis Zoo, Shaw's Botanical Gardens, written 75 scientific papers, I knew what to look for and began to look for what might cause this birth defect. And everybody said it was genetic. Well, I found that it was due to a deficiency of a single mineral. Deficiency of a single mineral. Was able to go back into the colony where this baby monkey was being raised for NASA for space projects. There were 24 unrelated monkeys, baby monkeys, the same age that still were alive, but they had the disease. Got permission to do biopsies of their pancreases and livers and lungs, and sure enough, they all had cystic fibrosis. They were not related genetically in any way, shape, or form. Gave them the mineral that was missing and cured them all. Wrote it up. Asked for permission to get it published, and I was fired from Emory University and Yerkes Primate Center. I said, "Wallach, you must be sniffing glue. Everybody knows that cystic fibrosis is genetically transmitted." I said, "Well, why don't you call together a committee like you would for challenging a thesis for a PhD student? Get geneticists, get experts in cystic fibrosis, get pediatricians, and let them challenge my evidence. Let me bring my evidence and respond to them. If I can satisfy them, and they're all agreed, then we can move forward and get grants and save kids. But if we can't, then go ahead and fire me." They said, "No, we'd be embarrassed to tears to call together such a committee because everybody knows that it's genetically transmitted." And this is the press release from Emory University in March of 1978 when they knew that we had a non-human case of cystic fibrosis. They were very excited about it, and they wanted to get credit for it, so they sent out this positive news release. And then they fired me in another month when I told them it wasn't genetic. Okay, well, this is from June of 2005. June of 2005, the International Laboratory Animal Research Journal. You notice it says serendipitous insights involving non-human primates. This was the entire journal. This issue was dealing with primate research in human diseases because at this time the federal government had actually defunded primate research. It's too expensive, $1,000 a day for primates. Use mice is only 10 cents a day. If you have to use primates, go to the Gates Foundation, get money from them. The government's not going to pay for it. And so they took the top 10 serendipitous findings, the top 10 accidental findings in primate research that benefited humanity so well, said, look, even just by accident we found these things. And number 2 out of the top 10 for the 20th century was the discovery of the first non-human case of cystic fibrosis, my work. And there was like 3 paragraphs in that piece on the cystic fibrosis. And the last sentence, the last portion of that sentence, they had brackets and said, "And Emory University refused to release the name of the young pathologist who made the discovery," close brackets, because they were so embarrassed that they had fired me. And now they were using my work to try and save their research programs. One of the reasons why they didn't want it to be a simple nutritional deficiency disease, because the yearly cost just for the respiratory piece of cystic fibrosis, and there was a digestive piece also, and liver piece also, but for just the respiratory piece, the cost for one patient is almost $260,000 a year. So why do they want to give up that kind of income just by telling the truth? And this is why the medical system tends to fail us, is because they work for the money as opposed to the truth. These are some of the kids that I deal with cystic fibrosis. Little Sydney Myers from Fort Wayne, Indiana. She was supposed to have a double lung transplant, 2.5 years of age. Her parents didn't have insurance, didn't have money, and so they came to me, and we put her on the program. And here she is 6.5 years later, winning a dance contest. And, of course, she's perfectly normal at this time, and she'll be able to have normal babies and no problem. Now, an opportunity came along in 1989 for me to go to Qishan Province, China. I went to Qishan Province, China to do autopsies on kids that died of Qishan's disease which is a deficiency of a single mineral. Now, the same mineral is the same deficiency that causes cystic fibrosis. Now, that's not unusual. People say, well, you must be infatuated with that mineral. No. Calcium deficiency can result in 147 different diseases. Zinc deficiency is a big cause of many different birth defects. And so this mineral deficiency, selenium, is no different. There's probably 25 different diseases caused by selenium deficiency. Well, Qishan disease, as it's called, is named after the province in China where it occurs so frequently because there's little or no of this mineral selenium in the soil there. Plants that they grow, corn and wheat, don't require selenium. And when these poor farm kids eat these grains, they get plenty of calories, maybe a little protein, but they don't get any of this mineral. And thousands of them die every month. There's over 300 million people in that one state. There's over 300 million people in those provinces. So when a couple of thousand kids die every month, it's a serious problem, obviously, but it's not like it's an epidemic going through and killing millions and so per month. And so this is one of those things where they just sort of learned to live with it. They would supplement these kids with selenium, and they saved many of them by doing that. So I went there and I said, if I'm correct, and cystic fibrosis is caused by congenital selenium deficiency, by a deficiency of selenium during pregnancy, and some of these kids in China, in Qishan province, are going to have cystic fibrosis. And I took that thought to people who were geneticists and people who were experts in cystic fibrosis, and they laughed at me again and said, well, now we know why you got fired. You're really dumb because Chinese kids don't get cystic fibrosis. I said, really? I've autopsied Oriental kids and black kids that had cystic fibrosis. And I went to China, did 1,700 autopsies. 1,700 autopsies in this program. And I was hoping for 1 or 3 or 5 or something like that, kids with cystic fibrosis. Well, it turns out that 35%, 595 of them had cystic fibrosis out of the 1,700. There was unimpeachable evidence. The slides are still there in the universities where the work was done. It can be tracked. We can redo the study again. We'll have the same result, I guarantee you that. Sent copies of this, published in English, published in Chinese, in peer-review refereed scientific journals. And guess what? Sent them to the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation. Never had a response. They should have their nonprofit status taken away from them because every child that's born with cystic fibrosis or dies of cystic fibrosis is on their head. Somebody needs to go to jail, okay? Well, I got a 3 for when I did those 1,700 autopsies because I also found out the cause, prevention, and cure for muscular dystrophy. Worked on that for years. Actually worked with the Amish communities, which have a very high rate of muscular dystrophy. And guess what? We're able to support and promote maintenance repair, reverse muscular dystrophy. Even their own doctors said it was reversed. Gave Jerry Lewis from the Muscular Dystrophy Foundation copies of many of these kids' reports and their records, showing even their doctors said they had had their muscular dystrophy reversed. He took it to the Muscular Dystrophy Foundation, and they fired Jerry Lewis for insisting that they look at this seriously. They fired Jerry Lewis. Again, I believe they should have their tax-exempt status taken away from them because every time a kid is born with muscular dystrophy or dies from it, it's on their heads. Somebody needs to go to jail. Cardiovascular disease, we've already talked about this briefly. Congestive heart failure, deficiency of a single vitamin. Cardiomyopathy heart disease. Qishan disease is a deficiency of a single mineral. Coronary artery disease is caused by inflammation, eating fried foods, processed meats, oils, microwave popcorn, all that kind of stuff. And then coronary thrombosis is caused by an omega-3 essential fatty acid deficiency. None of these cardiovascular diseases is caused by what? Cholesterol or saturated fat. It was a sales campaign to sell Crisco. Remember, Procter & Gamble gave the American Heart Association, brokered by Ansel Keys, $1.7 million to endorse Crisco and demonize cholesterol. Records show now that the heart age of most people in the industrialized world, including America, are older than their chronological age. In men, it's 7.8 years older, and women 5.6 years old. That's because of the eating of trans fats and heterocyclic amines, which cause particular inflammation in the coronary arteries and cause heart disease. And this just shows you a map what part of the continental United States and the islands of Hawaii and Alaska have the highest rates of heart ages that are far older than their chronological age. Here's one of the bad boys when it comes to cardiovascular disease, microwave popcorn. We're seeing more and more kids, we're talking about 8, 10-year-olds, 3-year-olds, 2-year-olds dying of heart disease, coronary artery disease, because what? Oh, they're being babysat with Microwave popcorn. You know, the parents can't afford babysitters, so they give them a bag of microwave popcorn and let them watch TV or put on a giggly cartoon movie while they're doing work in the kitchen. And these kids are dead by the time they're in their teens and early 20s. Microwave popcorn contributes to 50,000 heart attacks a year, 20,000 deaths. Front page story in the USA Today. Now, the new Crisco, of course, again demonized by the American Heart Association in exchange for $1.7 million. Procter & Gamble always trying to expand their market. And what they wanted to do was have you deep fry your Thanksgiving turkey in Crisco instead of roasting it, like we've done traditionally since the days of the Revolution. The new Crisco, made to help take the fat worry out of good eating. Well, who put the fat worry into it? The American Heart Association, by demonizing cholesterol and saturated fat. And of course, all this story came from 2 full pages of the New York Times. And basically, we're talking about saturated fat does not cause heart disease. Okay? And of course, this goes back to Dr. Ansel Keys again. He was, through his force of will, I mean, this guy was one of these bombastic guys. He could pound on the podium and yell and scream, and people believed him because he was so forceful, and he drove the use of Crisco rather than milk and cream and butter and eggs and lard. Now, in addition to demonizing cholesterol and saturated fat, they actually looked at making it sexier to use Crisco, and so they looked at the Isle of Crete and came up with a Mediterranean diet. In fact, the Mediterranean diet was a fraud. It was a sales campaign to sell Crisco. There was no evidence to back up any of the claims for the Mediterranean diet. Fried foods, trans fats, cause stroke. They contribute to the inflammation of arteries that cause stroke. If you're deficient in omega-3s and you're eating a lot of fried foods, you're going to get a stroke, even if you're 2 years old, even if you're 6 months old. Quechan province in the red here, selenium-depleted red area. Now, you've all heard of SIDS, sudden infant death syndrome. And of course, another failed theory was doctors said that SIDS was caused by the baby sleeping on their back. What a dumb theory that was. They didn't use the special stains to see if the SIDS was caused by heart disease. In fact, these kids that died of SIDS when they're 2 months old, 2 weeks old, was caused by a deficiency of selenium. It was Quechan's disease. I did the special stains because I'm a pathologist that looks at those details. And so we actually sued the FDA for many years trying to get selenium into prenatal formulas and also into infant formulas after the baby's born. And we had a big fight. They didn't like the idea that this might deal with genetic diseases like cystic fibrosis, muscular. So when we talked about SIDS, they signed off on that one. They signed off on that one. Let us put it in infant formulas. In fact, it's required. Selenium is now required in infant formulas to deal with SIDS. But through the back door, we're also going to eliminate muscular dystrophy and cystic fibrosis because it'll also deal with that. So we had to do little surreptitious things there and go through the back door to get a threefer. And these are the sort of kids that would die from Quechan disease from a selenium deficiency because they lived entirely on wheat and corn in a place that had little or no selenium in the soil. Dr. Fred Kern, professor of medicine at the University of Colorado, was training a bunch of newly graduated medical doctors on how to examine seniors. And he found this chart of an 88-year-old guy. He says, come on, let's go examine this guy. Goes in the examining room and he looks at him. He says, is this you? He points to the chart and says, is this you? Yeah. He says, the chart here says you're 88 years old. You don't look that old. He says, yeah, people say I look like I'm 50. And he says, well, what do you attribute your youthful looks to when you're 88 years old? And he said, I eat 25 eggs a day. I've been doing it for 17 years. I'm going to do it for another 100 years. Well, of course, this is not what Dr. Kern was looking for in front of these students. And I didn't say it in the article, but I guarantee you, he sat down, he's fanning himself with his clipboard. He said, okay, sir, why are you eating 25 eggs a day? And the guy stands up, throws his chest out, throws his shoulders back and said, because it makes me more studly. Now, you think about that. When you look at testosterone, estrogen, progesterone, adrenal hormones, they're all steroid hormones, and they're 95% by weight cholesterol. They're 95% by weight cholesterol. You want a cholesterol-restricted diet, and you're taking statin drugs to lower your cholesterol, there's nobody home anymore. You get erectile dysfunction, low T. Women go into menopause when they're 35 years old and start getting hot flashes and night sweats, and they stop cycling when they're 35, 40 years old because they're not making enough hormones. You get adrenal exhaustion. But even more importantly than all that, we had a new disease, a new big boy disease called Alzheimer's disease. 45 years ago, Alzheimer's disease didn't exist, even by another name. Today, it's the number 4 killer of adults over the age of 65. It's driven. It's a physician-caused disease. 75% of the human brain weight is the white matter of the brain, the myelin. It's called myelin. It's the insulation material of the brain. And this myelin that makes up 75% of your brain weight is 100% cholesterol. So you go on a cholesterol-restricted diet, no more cholesterol in your blood, or very little because you're getting it down to like 100 with statin drugs, you're going to get Alzheimer's disease. It's an Alzheimer's disease is a preventable disease. It's a reversible disease. And this is the entire story of saturated fat and cholesterol in Time magazine. I want you to look at Ansel Keys on the left part of your screen. And Ansel Keys here, he even looks like a Nazi. He was actually put on the cover of Time magazine as the hero who saved the American cardiovascular system by identifying cholesterol and saturated fat as the evil ones. He was the one that demonized them. Cholesterol on the front page of Time magazine, and this is the method they use to demonize cholesterol. On your right-hand part of your screen, Time magazine, Eat Butter, big scoop of butter on the cover, and this is a article, obviously a cover story, 5 pages, talks about the story with Ansel Keys and how he got Procter & Gamble to endorse a diesel engine submarine lubricant for cooking as opposed to butter, cream, lard, and eggs. In this one on the right-hand side, Time magazine, Eat Butter, this is from June 23, 2014, said scientists labeled saturated fat the enemy and why they were wrong. You need to read that one, and you'll realize how badly you've been defrauded by the medical system and the pharmaceutical industry. The individuals on Earth, the culture on Earth that has the fewest cardiovascular events are the Inuit Eskimos above the Arctic Circle. No less than a dozen times a year, there's articles printed in scientific journals on these peoples. And they're kind of unique. They just don't get cardiovascular disease. And yet, 98% of their traditional diet above the Arctic Circle is red meat and fat. They eat nothing but whale meat and whale blubber, walrus meat and walrus blubber, seal meat and seal blubber, bear meat and bear fat. They don't eat vegetables or fruit. They don't eat nuts and grain. Their cholesterols run 350 to 500. They don't get cardiovascular disease until they come down into the lower 48 and eat like us. Salt is not bad. Salt has 2 essential nutrients in it, sodium and chloride, required for all kinds of chemical reactions inside cells. Can't live without sodium and chloride. And of course, chlorine is also required to make stomach acid to keep your stomach sterile, to help pepsin, the enzyme, digest proteins, amino acids, and help the Castle's intrinsic factor to absorb B12. Also, to absorb most minerals, you're going to require stomach acid. You're going to get reflux if you don't have enough stomach acid to keep your stomach sterile, because yeast and bacteria will grow in there. And so you need stomach acid to keep your stomach sterile. Anybody who tells you to restrict your salt because of high blood pressure should be put in jail. Somebody needs to go to jail here. 1982, salt, a new villain. 2014, salt doesn't cause high blood pressure. This shows you death rates, okay, from heart disease. And then, of course, in February of 2012, the FDA sent an urgent stop email to all licensed medical doctors in America. It says, stop writing prescription for statin drugs, Lipitor, Zocor, Mevacor, Levostatin, these kinds of things. And they listed them on that email. Stop writing prescriptions for these drugs. Stop telling your patients to get on cholesterol-restricted diets. Because if you continue to do this, you're going to increase the risk of type 2 diabetes by 52% and Alzheimer's disease by 100%. 4 months later, Science News, June of 2012, good cholesterol not so beneficial. Wait a minute, your doctor says it's everything. Of course, they say it's not beneficial. And then they went on to say that higher HDL, high-density lipoprotein, the good cholesterol, high good cholesterol levels don't reduce the rate of heart disease or heart attacks. Why is that? Because no heart disease is caused by cholesterol or saturated fat. Remember, congestive heart failure is caused by deficiency of a single vitamin. Cardiomyopathy of heart disease is caused by deficiency of a single mineral. Coronary artery disease is caused by inflammation. And thrombotic heart disease, coronary thrombosis, blood clot in the coronary artery or brain artery, is caused not by cholesterol and saturated fat, but an omega-3 essential fatty acid deficiency. Margarine is the worst type of fat for the heart. And this includes the margarine that's in between the chocolate cookies and Oreo cookies. And here's the front cover story, FDA to trim trans fats out of food. And I thought they were too lenient on the people who had trans fats in their foods they manufactured. They gave them 3 months to do it, and that's 90 days. When you have so many thousands of people dying from this, or young kids dying from this, somebody needs to go to jail. Let's look at athletes real quickly. Exercise is thought to be a very, very good thing. It can be done properly. But let's look at professional athletes, look at amateur athletes, and let's look at their average lifespan. Let's look at how long they live. Jim Fixx, the darling in the medical world, because he said you don't have to supplement. All you have to do is run and you'll keep your arteries clean. He died at 52 while he was running. His protege, his top student, Brian Maxwell from Canada, died at age 51 while running. He had 12 gold medals in long distance running, 3 of which were in the Olympics. And exercise is supposed to be good for you. And of course, the darling of the medical system for exercise was Jim Fixx. He was a long distance runner. He was a professor of economics in one of the Ivy League schools. And he was the darling of the medical world because when he was interviewed on TV and asked if he took any vitamins and minerals, he says, "Nah, you don't need to do that. Don't take any vitamins and minerals. Just run, you'll keep your arteries clean." Well, he dropped dead while he was running a marathon at age 52, and so his theory didn't work. It was a failed theory. His protege, Brian Maxwell from Canada, died at 51 while he was running. He had 12 gold medals for long-distance running, 3 were in the Olympics, and he invented the power bar, and he sold the rights to the power bar to Nestle's corporation, and 3 months after he received his $3 million, he drops dead during a run. Cardiomyopathy heart disease, a deficiency of a single mineral, just like Jim Fixx. Now, because of this, the Journal of the American Medical Association did a literature review, which was published in December of 1982. In September of 1982, Jim Fixx died, and they did this literature search because he was their hero, and they were just really freaking out because here we are, our hero dies of a heart attack while he's running. And they published it as a kind of letter to the editor thing in the Journal of the American Medical Association in 1982. Also, they published it later on as an abstract in Running World or Runner's World magazine. They said, while running, a man's risk of heart attack death increases by 700% while running. Increased by a factor of 700%. Now, that shocked everybody because they thought exercise was good. Well, when you take all professional athletes of all sports combined, and you look at them from an average lifespan, their average lifespan is 62. When you take out professional football players, their average lifespan is 51. There's never been a professional athlete ever lived to be 100. So what does that say to you about exercise? There's something problematic about exercise. It's not what it was led to you to believe it was. So what's going on here is when you sweat, you're not sweating out water. Sweat is not water. But yet athletes will go to great extents to rehydrate using water, or they'll drink these sports drinks that have 2 nutrients in them or 6 nutrients. And as a result, they begin to break down. They'll get torn cartilage in their knees, they'll get torn cartilage in their hips, they'll get torn muscles, torn tendons or Achilles tendon. They'll get cramps, they'll get all kinds of stuff. And they have to get taken off the field on the stretcher and so on. And then some of them die, okay, because they're sweating out all the nutrients floating around their blood. If they're not supplementing, they may only have 55 or 60 nutrients, which they're sweating out. If they're supplementing, they may have 90. But if you're not supplementing and you're exercising, you're in real trouble. Okay? Reggie Lewis, captain of the Boston Celtics, collapsed during a playoff game with the Charlotte Hornets. He survived that first cardiomyopathy heart attack, and he was given a drug to kind of support his heart function. And he was told to do light exercise like throwing free throws from the free throw line on a court. And 2 weeks later, after his initial attack, he died of a second cardiomyopathy heart attack. If Reggie Lewis had been given 10 cents worth of selenium, he'd still be alive today, because he died of a simple selenium deficiency disease. Moses Malone, NBA Hall of Famer, dies at 60 of a cardiomyopathy heart attack. Roddy Piper dies at 61 from a cardiomyopathy heart attack. This fellow here, a cardiologist and a soccer star in Brazil, drops dead at age 57 from a cardiomyopathy heart attack. So why is it that strenuous exercise is unhealthy? Is because you must supplement to replace all the nutrients you're sweating out. That's simple. Obesity, as we pointed out in the beginning, is not due to eating too much and lack of exercise. Obesity is, in fact, a simple nutritional deficiency. And there's no end in sight for the obesity epidemic because those nutrients are disappearing from our food faster and faster. The symptoms you get from that deficiencies are cravings, binge eating, and the munchies. Experts tell us that 70% of our kids under the age of 12 are overweight. 40% of our kids under the age of 12 are obese, 30 pounds or more of their ideal weight for their height. And this has nothing to do with eating too much or lack of exercise. This is caused by nutritional deficiency, totally preventable, totally reversible quite quickly at a half a pound to 2 pounds a day. This is a kind of a false story. This is a false flag attack, so to speak. I guarantee this little baby who's under 2 years of age is not eating supersized bags of French fries. Not going to happen. But he is obese. And if he was eating these French fries and continued to eat them from then on, the odds are he would die of a coronary artery disease at age 10 or 12 years of age because of the trans fats, heterocyclic amines, and the acrylamides in the French fries. He's obese because he's deficient in nutrients. Now, this is everywhere USA in 1920. This is when they began the theory that lack of exercise and eating too much was the cause of obesity. Of course, these girls are getting a lot of giggles here, but this has nothing to do with their cause of obesity or their repair themselves or getting rid of their obesity. They're going to have fun, they're going to waste some time, but they're not going to solve their problems here. It's a nutritional deficiency problem. Here's a mother in Brazil who ate 20 bath sponges with soap suds and skin dandruff in it, as well as the parrot droppings, as well as the sand in the bottom of the parrot cage, because she had such crazy cravings. And of course, pregnant women are legendary for gaining baby fat during pregnancy. That's because they're missing nutrients, because the embryo is stealing nutrients from them faster than they're getting them themselves. And this is Ivan, of course, met him about 3 years ago. And Ivan weighed 423 pounds when I met him. He lost, on our program, with our supplementation of nutrients, lost 17 pounds in the first week. He lost 60 pounds in the first 30 days. That's 2 pounds a day. And he dropped down from 400 pounds to 165 pounds in 7 months. And 2 years later, his picture's on the right. And he, of course, 2 years later is still looking good and hasn't gained back a quarter of an ounce. And this is because this is a simple nutritional deficiency disease. You take the nutrients, it goes away. You take the nutrients, you don't get fat. Just that simple. In horses, the behavior called munchies is called cribbing. You can see here the horse is not even in that stall in the barn. It's a horse and buggy Amish farm in just south of Fort Wayne, Indiana. And the buggy's bringing the babies with muscular dystrophy late, and being a physician and a veterinarian, I said, well, if there's a barn here, I'll go look at the animals. And sure enough, there's a cribbing evidence there. And so I knew that that horse in that barn was deficient in minerals. You give them minerals and it stops. You give people the right minerals and the obesity goes away. It's just very simple. Osteoporosis and arthritis, simple mineral deficiencies, simple vitamin deficiencies. It's not a complex disease at all. It's a simple nutritional deficiency. Every tissue in our body, every organ in our body wants to go away. It's kind of like sand on a beach or paint on your house. Over time, getting beat up from the weather and the temperature changes and so forth, what happens is everything goes away. Well, if you're not taking in the raw materials to maintain it, like paint your house every year, right, that kind of thing, change your oil every 3,000 miles, you're going to have problems. And arthritis, and talking about the coming epidemic of arthritis. That's because we no longer have the right nutrients in our food anymore. We'll get into that in a moment. Now, colas are linked to bone breaks, fractures, because when you take in calcium for your bones, and oftentimes doctors will do that, you just give people calcium. You need all 90 essential nutrients for bone health. But if you're going to take in calcium along with the other nutrients, you have to have the right ratio between calcium and phosphorus. There's got to be 2 calcium for 1 phosphorus if everything's going to work well. But if you drink colas, even diet colas, regardless of what brand of cola it is, guess what? You're going to have 4 phosphorus for 1 calcium. And that scenario is going to leach all the minerals out of your bones. And that's why you find a lot of young athletes get fractures just running down the field because they're drinking lots of colas. Calcium deficiency causes kidney stones. The first thing a medical doctor will tell you is stop eating dairy, and for goodness sakes, don't supplement with any calcium, when in fact, calcium deficiency is the cause of kidney stones. What happens is your parathyroid glands don't like that. They reach into your bones and they suck out minerals, particularly calcium, and that calcium that your parathyroid gland is pulling out of your bones raises your calcium level in your blood, as well as causes kidney stones. Failed medical theory. Popular osteoporosis drugs are linked to hip fractures. Why is that? You know, 1-800-BAD drugs. Why is that? Because they were phosphorus. Fosamax, too much phosphorus, not enough calcium, and it causes demineralization of your bones. Another failed medical theory. Big surprise, another failed medical theory is that osteoporosis is caused in women when they go through menopause because they don't have enough estrogen to keep calcium in their bones. That's an absolute lie. It's not true. Men actually get osteoporosis at a faster rate than women, more seriously and at a faster rate. You see all these little old guys with canes waddling around in the malls and airports and shopping centers and grocery stores and so forth. They have osteoporosis. And of course, this is a failed theory that women got it and men didn't because women went through menopause, had reduction or lost their hormones. That was a nonsense, absolute criminal theory, and somebody should go to jail for that one because they killed so many men who fell and had hip fractures when they should have been on mineral supplements to prevent that. This young fella here, the Prince of Dubai, Sheikh Rashid, died at 33 while he was running. You can see he's a very fit young fella, runner, played soccer, played rugby, And he was held up as the kind of fitness guru in Dubai, kind of leading the country in their health. He was also a guy who was going to become the king when the king died, and he drops dead at age 33 while he was running. Cardiomyopathy, heart attack, a simple deficiency of a single mineral. And so hopefully we're going to Dubai and to teach the people there that they have to supplement. No matter how wealthy you are, you still need to supplement to make sure your tissues are receiving everything they need. Terrible tragedy, terribly unnecessary. Andy Young from the Civil Rights Movement, also he was the ambassador to the United Nations under Jimmy Carter. He was the mayor of Atlanta for a couple of terms. And he called me from San Diego to come to Atlanta in his home and speak to him because of my work in sickle cell anemia not being genetic. And we were talking about that, and I noticed he was limping. I said, with all due respects, Mr. Ambassador, why are you limping? He says, well, I got bone-to-bone arthritis in both my knees, and I'm scheduled at Emory University, the group that fired me for my cystic fibrosis research, to have a double knee replacement. I said, sir, with all due respect, I can regrow your cartilage. I can support and promote maintenance and repair by supplementing with a program we call the Healthy Bone and Joint Pack. And he said, well, these are the best surgeons, orthopedic surgeons in the world, and they say you can't. And I said, well, sir, with all due respect, they're liars. Okay, we can, in fact, support and promote maintenance and repair, and you will regrow your cartilage. And he didn't want to have the surgery, so he canceled the surgery and let me rebuild his knees. In 90 days, we rebuilt his knees, and we became very good friends, and we do lots of great things around the world together. One of the things he did was introduce me to this young lady, Delisha Jones. She was the center on the U.S. Women's Olympic team that had won 2 gold medals in the Olympics, the basketball team. And getting prepared for their 3rd run at the Olympics, she tore her hamstring and Achilles tendon on the right-hand side. And the surgeons who were going to put her together said, Delisha, you know, we can put you together mechanically, but you might not play at the same skill level because of these injuries that are very devastating. And you might consider coaching. Well, she didn't like that. She went to Andy Young, and he referred her to me. Again, using the Healthy Bone and Joint Pack, we're able to support and promote maintenance repair of the muscles and the tendons and ligaments and cartilage, regrew her, and they went back and won their 3rd gold medal. And this is me giving her an award, a certificate for sharing her story with other athletes. And I often wonder, why do women who are 6'5" wear 8-inch heels? Okay, knee surgery for arthritis is worthless. This was a study from Harvard Medical School, published in the New England Journal of Medicine. This was July 2002. And this is where we like to refer people. They looked at 300,000 sets of records from people who had knee replacement, hip replacement, shoulder replacement surgeries. They found out that the disease just kept getting worse and worse, and you had to replace that device every couple of years because the bone would get thinner and thinner and actually might tear and rupture and break. And so they said, ultimately, knee replacement surgeries for arthritis, hip replacements, and shoulder replacements are worthless. And so, you know, give us 90 days with a Healthy Bone and Joint Pack and let us support and promote maintenance and repair and see what happens. You're going to be very happy because by supporting and promoting maintenance and repair, we can support and promote repair and reappearance and regrowth of that cartilage, no matter what your doctor says is doable. 4 years later, November 2006, that same group of orthopedic surgeons from Harvard Medical School looked at the same 300,000 records, but this time they looked at the backs of these same people. They said back surgery unnecessary for sciatica, low back pain, for things like peripheral neuropathies. And so again, we can support and promote maintenance repair with what we call the Healthy Bone and Joint Pack. It has all 90 essential nutrients in it and gives the body the raw materials it needs to support and promote maintenance repair. Diabetes, there's an epidemic right now in the world. It's doubling. Diabetes is doubling almost every year now in America. Right now in America, 30% of Americans either have diabetes or prediabetes. It's breaking us financially. It's breaking the American medical system financially. Okay, it's breaking our country financially. It is one of the big contributing factors to the national debt of almost $19 trillion is type 2 diabetes. Why is there an epidemic? Because there's none of this mineral in the soil. Remember, it's a deficiency of a single mineral. We've known that for almost 80 years. The big story, to show you that it's not a genetic disease, goes to the Pima Indians. And above the line, where the line goes through the P and underneath the I under Pima, you see a big yellow band, looks like a big yellow banana there in the eastern part of Mexico. But above that line that goes through the P and underneath the I, you'll see it's the same genetic pool. That whole yellow area above that line, which is the border for Arizona, between Arizona and Mexico, mainland of Mexico. And below that border, you can see that big yellow swath. That is the range of the Pima Indians. They're one of the few Native American tribes that did not intermix with other Indian tribes. They did not intermix with the released black slaves after the Civil War was over. They never intermixed with the explorers from Spain and Portugal and France and Germany. And so they're almost pure, same genetic pool across the American border on the American side and below the American border on the Mexican side. And here's a couple of pictures of the Pima Indians, same genetic pool. Now remember, this is the exact same genetic pool. The group of young men on your left are Pima Indians. They're typical of those in Mexico. They're tall and slim. They live in a third world country situation, don't have any of the amenities of the Western world. They're still using horses for plowing and wagons to haul stuff around drawn by horses. And they look pretty good. The ones on the right are above the border in America, in Arizona. And you see they're all obese. Even the children are obese. And they have their vans and their pickup trucks and so forth. And they all work in factories instead of being subsistence farmers like the ones in Mexico. Let's have a look at the rate of diabetes. The Mexican Pima Indians have a rate of type 2 diabetes of 6%. The American Pima Indians, which are written up as the culture in America that has the highest rate of type 2 diabetes, 46%. The average American rate is considered like 33%, a third, and so they are 30% higher than that, 46%. Now, we know it's not genetic because it's the same genetic pool. So what could it be? Well, we know it's a mineral deficiency, but why? There's a thin line going between those two peoples, and yet there's such a difference between them. Why is this? And you'll see in just a moment. Again, diabetes cases double. Kids are being born with type 2 diabetes now, not only type 1 diabetes, but they're being born with type 2 diabetes. And here's a 3.5-year-old, from Houston, and she's 3.5 years of age, but she weighs as much as a 10-year-old, and she has type 2 diabetes. More blacks lose legs to diabetes than whites. This is one of those things where the Black Gene book comes in, Black Gene Lies. More blacks lose a leg to diabetes than whites. Why is that? It's not a genetic thing. It's because the medical system has been able to capture the black community and tell them that all their diseases are genetic, and if they stick with the medical community, the medical doctors will save them from their genetic diseases. And so whatever the doctor says, they don't question it, they don't get a second or third opinion, they just do what the doctor says, and the doctor abuses them financially as well as kills them early. This fellow here, Jerry Murphy, owns one of the largest medical diagnostic labs in America, Gamma Labs. And he had terrible type 2 diabetes. He was running well over 200. His blood sugar was running well over 200. His A1C hemoglobin was like 9 or 12 instead of 5 or below. And to make a long story short, we made a wager because we had a mutual friend who said I could help him with his diabetes. And he was very skeptical, of course, working with the medical community. And he says, look, Wallach, we'll be best friends. We'll do a lot of good things for America together if you can do what you say. If you can't, I will destroy you. I'm going to make a CD. I'll have bounty hunters pass them out everywhere you go, and I will dog you until you're destroyed if you fail. I said, okay, Jerry, you're on. He was quite shocked that I so quickly said, okay, let's do it. Well, to make a long story short, in 3 months' time, his A1C hemoglobin was below 5, and his blood sugar was down to like 90, or had been running 240. Okay? And he's now totally diabetes-free. He's a wonderful friend, and we just love him to pieces because he does great things for us too. Cancer is not a genetically transmitted disease. It is a self-inflicted disease. Everything you do either prevents cancer or causes cancer. And so let's have a look. Doctors and researchers, they're so interested because it's such a horrible disease, they want to run in and get the cure right away. And they fail every time to find the cure. The first prevention research was done and published in 1912. It was on the benefits of selenium in preventing cancer. They published it in Popular Mechanics magazine. Now, why did they publish something like that in Popular Mechanics magazine? That's because they brought it to all the medical journals of the day, and they wouldn't publish it. That's nutrition. We're not interested in that. That was 1912. Well, in 1998, the University of Arizona redid the same study, redid it, got the same exact results, showing they could reduce the risk of prostate cancer by 65%, 69%. Reduce the risk of breast cancer by 32%, reduce the risk of colorectal cancer by 95% by supplementing with selenium. Published it in the Annals of Medicine, which is a very well-respected medical journal. High-fiber diets don't cut colon cancer rates. That's another failed theory. Bacon, ham, sausages are a big cancer threat, equal to smoking and working in an asbestos environment. Now, I've been yelling about this for 45 years since I did those autopsies in the Center for the Biology of Natural Systems. And the World Health Organization 2 weeks ago made the announcement. The World Health Organization will publish a report on Monday, which was 2 weeks ago, on the dangers of eating processed meats. The World Cancer Research Fund has warned for several years that there is strong evidence that consuming a lot of processed meats such as ham, bacon, and salami increases the risk of colon cancer and many other types of cancer, okay? They also say that I'm quoting them now, probably all red meat causes cancer. That's not true. It's how you cook the red meat, okay, will be a factor. This was a study published in 1998 from the University of South Carolina, and they were working on the Harvard Nurses Health Study, 90,000 nurses, 20 years, and their piece was to evaluate the rate of breast cancer in women and how they cook their food. Okay, they're getting down into that area of interest. Well, they found out that the women who cooked their meat very well done, where the fat was severely browned or burnt, increased their risk of breast cancer by 462%. The ones who cooked their meat medium rare and the fat remained white reduced the risk of breast cancer by 462%. So that's a 900% difference between the most extreme you're going to get it to the most extreme you're not going to get it. And what a wonderful thing. Just how you cook your food determines whether you're actually going to get breast cancer or not. And then there was some wonderful research by Dr. Gerhard Schrauser, great biochemist from University of California, who showed very clearly that you could reduce the risk of breast cancer by 82% just by supplementing with 200 micrograms, 1/5 of a milligram of the trace mineral selenium. Remember, he said mammograms are not prevention, and they're dangerous because one mammogram has a radiation equal to 500 chest x-rays. Also, we find out that, and this is very recent, in October of 2015, 61% of all positive mammograms are false positives. And they say, you know, this is too complicated here, so we have to have a biopsy. Get a biopsy. You know, this is unequivocal, but we're concerned, and so let's take the breast off and do radiation and chemotherapy. So they're hit in, they bill the insurance company or Medicare, Medicaid for a couple $100,000 and the doctor is happy. Kills the patient. Hot dogs cause butt cancer. This is directed towards kids. These are highway signs you'll begin seeing on the highways around America. Genetics have nothing to do with cancer, It's eating fried foods, processed meats with nitrates and nitrites cause the problems. Arsenic is known to be an essential nutrient since 1947, and today even the medical school at the New York University proved unequivocally that they could put people with acute promyelocytic leukemia, the most vicious, the most aggressive type of leukemia, into remission in just a couple of months. And 10, 12, 15 years later, they're still in remission. They didn't want to call it a cure because it's an essential nutrient. Steve Jobs dies at 56. Satoru Iwata, CEO of Nintendo, dies at 55. His parents buried him at age 55. Dementia, there's 5 different types of dementia. There's no law that says you can't have all 5. Vascular dementia, arteries are clogged in your brain, same way they're clogged in your heart and your kidneys. Alzheimer's disease, a cholesterol deficiency. Korsakoff syndrome, a deficiency of a single vitamin. Wernicke-Korsakoff syndrome, which is the deficiency of that single vitamin, and also MS mixed in with it, multiple sclerosis. Vitamin B12 deficiency, dementia, you can have all 5 of these at the same time. Okay? Now remember, Alzheimer's disease is caused by a cholesterol deficiency. It is not genetic, not caused by aluminum. This is my favorite slide on Alzheimer's disease. The mother's 82 years old, the son's 58. They both have Alzheimer's disease. They're both in the same nursing home. They both have the same doctor. They're on the same cholesterol-restricted diet, and they're on the same statin drug prescribed by that doctor. The doctor also owns the nursing home they're in. You should be getting a picture here. Somebody needs to go to jail. This came out in 1992, and this is one of the reasons that my original audio cassette tape, Dead Doctors Don't Lie, was so controversial. Vitamin E can ease memory loss in Alzheimer's victims. And I added a prepositional phrase when I read this. This was research from the Salk Institute in the University of California, San Diego. Vitamin E may ease memory loss in Alzheimer's victims, which means it cannot be genetically transmitted. Because there's no vitamin, there's no pharmaceuticals that can affect how a genetic disease manifests itself. 2 years later, the Johns Hopkins School of Medicine, very famous, very well respected in Baltimore, Maryland, went to the Cache Valley, Utah, and they found 5,000 people over the age of 65 who had no dementia, no serious disease, no heart disease, high blood pressure, kidney disease, nothing. And so they found them. They put them on 2 vitamins, vitamin C and vitamin E, because they were excited about this vitamin E story that came out 2 years earlier. And 10 years later, again, they had half these 5,000 people on this supplement, and the other half they put on a dummy pill. At the end of the 10 years, 2004, they opened up the envelope and undid the map. And the ones that got the vitamin C and E had 78% less Alzheimer's disease. Now, they all ate the same way, because they're all from the same culture. They all came from Scotland. All these 5,000 people came from the same religion. They were Mormons. They read the Book of Mormon. They were also using the supplement called the Words of Wisdom, which tells them what to eat, what not to eat, kind of like the Jewish kosher approach. And so there's more to it than just those 2 vitamins. Also, they were all subsistence farmers, much like Amish, very, very basic, very conservative farmers, only ate what they grew, no restaurants or hotels in their valley where they lived. And so we actually had an analysis done of the flora of that entire valley. We know all the mineral veins and everything, what's in there. And so in the book, Epigenetics, it goes into great detail why these people had such a wonderful reduction in the rate of Alzheimer's disease just by supplementing those 2 vitamins, vitamin C and E, because they enhance the value and function of other things, is why. Type 2 diabetes has got to be genetic because we have 3 generations of type 2 diabetics in our family. No, that's not true. Have you ever heard of gluten intolerance? Gluten intolerance is generational. It's not genetic. It's not an allergy, but it is generational. And it causes eczema, dermatitis of all kinds, belly problems, belly pain, headaches, all kinds of nasty stuff. Celiac disease, appendicitis, diverticulitis, irritable bowel syndrome, inflammatory bowel disease, Crohn's disease, asthma, chronic bronchitis, pneumonia every wintertime, eczema, rosacea, dermatitis, psoriasis, infertility. It can contribute to 1,000 other diseases because these other diseases are nutritional deficiencies, and gluten intolerance changes the efficiency of absorption out of your intestines. If you can't absorb the nutrients, you have a problem. But let's say, let's talk about type 2 diabetes. And you only have 2% of the mineral you need to prevent diabetes in the soil where you're living and you're eating from local farmers markets. And now you have a gluten intolerance and you only have 10% of your availability of absorption. So what's 10% of 2%? 0.2%. You're going to get diabetes. It has nothing to do with genetics. And here is the villi, those little red finger-like projections on the left-hand side of your screen. And these villi increase the absorptive surface of the intestine. Well, here's a study on white rats. On your left-hand side are the healthy villi. You can see the little villi. This is a microscopic picture, obviously. The normal ones, you can see all the increased surface for absorption. In the middle picture, those same group of rats were put on a heavy gluten diet for 6 months. You can see the loss of the villi and the scar tissue beginning to form in between them. On the right-hand side, it's a year of a heavy gluten diet, and you look at all the scar tissue, they've lost almost 100% of their villi, and the intestinal lining is replaced with scar tissue. How do you absorb nutrition through there? You can't. And this is what gluten does to you. It's kind of like putting poison ivy on your skin. You get a contact dermatitis. With gluten, you get a contact enteritis. Okay, and inflammation of the intestines is caused by this protein, which is very, very irritating. Okay, now the nice thing about this is if a 10-year-old kid or a 3-year-old kid or a 6-month-old kid gets on a gluten-free diet, in a couple of weeks' time, you're going to see a dramatic benefit, particularly if you're giving them the 90 essential nutrients. Let's say somebody in their 20s and 30s and 40s gets on a gluten-free diet. Within a month, you're going to see something dramatic in a positive way, and it might take them a full year to repair. People who are in their 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s have been eating gluten 5 times a day and oatmeal for breakfast every day, drinking a couple of beers every Friday night, and having bread and pasta and crackers and gluten and whole grains all the time. It might take them 2 years to get a return to normal on a gluten-free diet, but they might show some dramatic thing you can see as a benefit within maybe 6 months. It just depends on how long and how severe the gluten damage is. Here's a perfect example. Little you see on your left was born with eczema and asthma. His mother was born with the same eczema and asthma. She's 28 years old when she delivered him. She'd had 3 miscarriages, and she had the same eczema and asthma, and she's breastfeeding him. So we gave her a gluten-free diet. We put her on the 90 essential nutrients, 16 minerals, 16 vitamins, 12 amino acids, 3 fatty acids, and in 2 weeks' time, her asthma or eczema she'd had for 28 years went away. In the same 2 weeks, you see in the middle there, his asthma and eczema went away in 2 weeks' time because he's getting all his nutrients through his mother's breast milk. Now, interesting thing about this, the pediatrician who's caring for him, the only thing he told the mother was, here's some hydrocortisone cream, rub it on his skin to prevent the itching. And also, I told her to clip his fingernails and put mittens on his hands so he wouldn't scratch himself in his sleep. Well, here he is on the right at 2 years of age, and you can see how happy he is. You can tell by looking at him, he doesn't have asthma and eczema. We see this all the time in kids, and the ones on the left have their eczema, dermatitis, psoriasis, and the ones on the right, they've been without gluten for anywhere from a month to 6 months, and they're getting the 90 essential nutrients. You can see the difference, very dramatic. This lady was this way for 23 years. Her dermatologist made $3 million treating her for 23 years. And of course, in 90 days, gluten-free diet, 90 essential nutrients, this is all reversible. Longevity, 1 in 5 Americans are disabled. 20% of Americans are disabled. We're supposed to have the finest medical system in the world. We don't. We have the most expensive medical system in the world, but it's problematic. Remember that 85% of all personal bankruptcies in America are due to medical bills. This just shows you the prevalence. It's the same pattern in the continental United States. It's always the southeastern states. It's always the Atlantic border there. We run up and down the Atlantic Ocean, and also the states around the Great Lakes. Also the southwestern states and up in the northwest where they have Indian tribes. It's the worst of the worst when it comes to disabilities here. Okay, and this is cancer. Here's one little bit of departure. The state that has the worst cancer rate is Kentucky. And of course, the reason why they have such terrible cancer is there's very few of the minerals in the Atlantic seaboard. There's very few of these minerals in the southeastern part of the United States, the old Confederate states, and the Indian reservations out west. There's one particular state, they fry everything. Kentucky, they fry everything. It's rumored they fry water, and that's why they have such a high rate of cancer. Life expectancy, the red, yellow, and orange are the shortest lived, and the ones in the blue counties are the longest lived people. There's a 25-year difference between the longest lived people and the shortest lived people in America simply because of the mineral supply in their soil, where their food is grown, and whether or not they fry food. The ones in the blue don't fry food, and the ones in the reds and orange and yellows do. Out west, southwest, west of the Mississippi River, Indian reservations, old Confederate states, in the southeastern part of the United States and eastern seaboard. Same thing for males. Statin drugs speed up aging process. Women go through menopause in their 30s. Low TED in males, regardless of age. Alzheimer's disease, we're now finding in 30-year-olds and 20-year-olds because it has nothing to do with age, nothing to do with genetics. It has to do with a cholesterol deficiency. If you're very, very good, like vegetarians, vegans who are really driven to stay away from animal products and cholesterol and saturated fat, and they take statin drugs, many of them, not all, but many of them, and they're the ones who have a high rate of Alzheimer's disease and hormonal problems. So I urge everybody to get a hold of these books, Black Gene Lies, Epigenetics, Immortality, and Rare Earths and Cures, and you'll learn why the top 20 longevity cultures live so long. What are their secrets? They have 23 common threads, and of course, I'm going to show you what I believe are the more important ones after these pictures. But I want you to look at Immortality. Look at the cover of that book. I want you to look at the top picture above that yellow line, just below the neck of that statue there. It's a fire. I want you to pay attention to that fire because this is very, very important in why the top longevity cultures, the top 20 longevity cultures are all third world cultures. Calorie restricted diets, these same top 20 longevity cultures only take in 600 to 900 calories a day, not because they know the science, they're illiterate, they're third world cultures. But they're so poor they can only afford 600 to 900 calories a day. Americans take in 2,500 to 4,000 calories a day. This fellow here, George Francis, died at 112 in December of 2008. He was the longest lived documented man in America. He lived considerably longer than 19 presidents he lived through, whose average lifespan was 75. The doctors who cared for these presidents documented their average lifespan came out in 1999 in a big study published in medical journals is 56, exactly half of the years that George Francis got. Now, he lived in a house, it was a cabin that his great-granddaddy built during the slave days, pot-belly stove, dirt floor. He was a crawdad fisherman, and fishermen sold those things to restaurants, Cajun restaurants, and he lived to be 112, double the lifespan of medical doctors who took care of presidents. So what was the secret? When he died, his daughter was asked by the reporters, and his daughter was reading the newspaper to him there. The daughter said, when she was asked, what did your daddy do to live to be 112? She said, he broke all the rules of healthy eating. He cooked in lard and ate butter and cream and eggs. In fact, she said his entire diet was dairy products, eggs, and lard sandwiches. Also on the right-hand side, you see the Russian Mismailov, 168 years of age. Is a very famous picture in the National Geographic where he is working in his tea plantation and also listening to a transistor radio at 168 years of age. Man from Syria died at 133 years of age. National Geographic cover, May 2013. This baby will live to be 120. Look at the grammar there. This baby will live to be 120. She's from the Decline Peninsula on the Pacific coast of Costa Rica in Central America, one of the poorest of poor countries and cultures on earth. Okay? These are the longest lived people in the Western Hemisphere. What's going on here? Why do they have 40 times 100 as we do? Why do they have 100 per 250 of their population? We Americans only have 100 per 10,000. This fellow's from Bolivia, the second longest lived culture in the Western Hemisphere. He's putting llama manure in his wood stove. There's a high-tech kitchen. He's 102. This fellow here is from Florida. When he turned 101, he actually got a hole-in-one on his 101st birthday. We need to find out what he does and make sure that Tiger Woods gets the information. These are the longest lived people on earth, the Hunzas from the Hunza Valley in the Karakoram Mountains that separate northern Pakistan from China. They're the longest lived people on earth. They live at 13,000 feet elevation, and they're descendants of Alexander the Great. When he moved east from Greece, after he won all the battles there, he moved east towards China, and of course having babies along the way. These people live at 13,000 foot elevation. You can see they're obviously third world, and they live in what we would call the land flowing with milk and honey. The Giltar Glacier, which is about a mile wide at 13,000 foot elevation, okay, the water that comes out from underneath the Giltar Glacier looks like milk because the glacier is grinding up limestone. And so the limestone powder comes out in the water, it looks like milk. And bees love minerals, and so there's lots of bees there. The land flowing with milk and honey. This is biblical. This is a biblical location. This is where people did well. They were successful in business. They were healthy. They lived a long time, had healthy children. In Okinawa, it's not all Okinawans live well or long. It's only a very small group of people up in one mountain, on the side of one mountain. They live to be an average of 85. Everybody else lives to be 52 to 60. So it's not all of Okinawa that lives well, it's just one little subculture. Now the reason is, of course, we'll get into in a second. We spent a lot of time with this fellow here, Mr. Taguchi, who's 102 years old, and he lives in this little subculture up on the side of this mountain, and so we know exactly what they do to live so long. And here's the oldest gal up there. She's a pop star. She goes around with a singing group, and she's the lead singer in a singing group singing pop songs, and you can just tell by looking at her, her energy is just tremendous. She's from the island of Kohama in Okinawa. In the last 300 years, this is the longest lived of humanity that's documented. Dr. Qing-Yun Li, and Chinese always put their last name first, so Qing-Yun Li, died at 256 years of age. He was born in 1677, died May 6, 1933. And he lives in a place that is rich with rare earths. In laboratory animals, rare earths double the lifespan of laboratory animals compared to the control group. Okay, we use them in electronics. We know they're very valuable for electronics, but also they're required. Ytterbium, yttrium, neodymium, praseodymium, europium, and samarium. And of course, they're all in the 90 essential nutrients and all 60 essential minerals. We need water for life. We need oxygen for life. You need the 90 essential nutrients for life. Your DNA, RNA, your genes, your telomeres, little end caps on your chromosomes will fail without these nutrients. You have to have them every second, every minute, every hour, every day, every week of every month of every year. Otherwise, you're going to have problems. It's just that simple. You cannot live without them. You need 16 minerals, 16 vitamins, 12 amino acids, 3 fatty acids. You have to have them. Your genes, your DNA, RNA, and telomeres must have these things. Otherwise, you can have the greatest genes in the world, but they're not going to perform. This is when I first understood epigenetics. Epigenetics has replaced genetics when it comes to the understanding of disease and longevity. This was a study we did at the St. Louis Zoo when I was doing all those autopsies back in the 1960s and 70s, and ended up in that book, which is in the Smithsonian Institute, The Disease of Exotic Animals. And Monsanto gave the St. Louis Zoo, because we're in the newspaper all the time because of these studies going on, gave the St. Louis Zoo a timed hydroponic unit. Had these big racks with all these trays and had seeds from barley grass, and on a timer it would water and fertilize this. And we would be able to harvest this like weekly. It's just wonderful for the zoo animals, eating dry food and hay all the time, no green grass. It's really a wonderful thing. And Perkins, who was from the St. Louis Zoo, obviously, and the TV show, okay, Mutual Omaha's Wild Kingdom, said, okay, Wallach, find out of what real value is this hydro. Is it just fun for these animals? Are we just wasting our time, or is it useful for them? And so I was able to steal eggs from the same mother-father common mallard ducks, farm ducks. I stole 100 eggs over a period of 3 months, put them in the refrigerator, just like you can put human frozen embryos in the freezer. Just put them in the refrigerator. When I had 100, I divided them into 4 groups of 25. The first group of 25, I just gave lettuce to eat for 6 weeks. The second group of 25, I gave nothing but the hydroponically grown barley grass, and you can see it's about 10, 15%, maybe even 20% bigger than the ones that just got the lettuce. The one in the middle with the little scale or the little ruler on it received the Ralston-Purina laboratory duck pellets. You see, it's double the size of the other two. But the one that really got optimal amounts of every nutrient it needed to maximize its genetic potential for size and strength and everything it can do was what we call the Huey group. It got both the pellets, the alfalfa pellets from Ralston-Purina, and the barley grass. Look at the difference. They're the same exact genes, same mother, father, incubated at the same time, and so there's no doubt that this is an epigenetic story here. In that study, the Center for the Biology of Natural Systems, we eliminated 900 different diseases in animals which still plague people. Because we realized there were nutritional deficiencies, we increased the nutritional supplementation of zoo animals and eliminated all the diseases. And of course, this is what saved the panda. The pandas were down to just maybe a dozen pandas left in zoos, and they were about ready to all die out. And then suddenly, we heard about Ling Ling, right? And suddenly we had all these other baby pandas. What's happening? I finally got to do an autopsy on one of them, and it was just starving to death because they're feeding it nothing but bamboo. And so I said, let's give them some dog food. Oh, you can't. This is an exotic animal. You can't give them dog food. So we gave them dry dog food, and now we have more pandas. We know what to do. They got to give them birth control. Okay? We've tripled the lifespan of animals with this information. And basically, if you look back 60 years ago, an old dog was 8 years old, 10-year-old dog is 25. In that same time span, we humans have added 2 or 3 months to our lifespan. We didn't triple it like we did for animals because we're using drugs and we use nutrition for animals. We eliminate every birth defect you can name and 10 times that many you can't in animals by supplementing preconception. And I urge everybody, when you're getting a couple that's dating strong, a couple that's getting engaged or a couple that's getting married, do not give them a gift card. Do not give them monogram towels. Do not give them a linen set to start their household. Give them the 90 essential nutrients, and then you won't be a grandmother babysitting a special needs child. How did rich people get their minerals back thousands of years ago? They'd give grave robbers big bags of silver and gold to get mummies and bring them mummies. They grind up the mummies into mummy dust, and they would use mummy dust as a condiment like salt and pepper on their food. They're getting the minerals from the mummy's bones and skin and vitamins from their livers and so forth. They did get some supplements that way, and they lived longer and healthier. Now, obviously, people who were slaves and subsistence farmers and people who were just carpenters couldn't afford big bags of gold and silver to get mummies. Where did they get their minerals? Well, the Scientific American did a wonderful story on why people began to live longer, were healthier, were smarter, did things, invented language and so forth, invented writing. And they said it was all because of cooking food. It all happened when food began to be cooked. And that's exactly right, but it wasn't because of the cooked food. But it began when food was cooked, but not because of the cooked food. Now, what was the universal fuel 3, 4, 5,000 years ago? Wood. No matter where in the world they burned fuel for heat, for cooking, for defense, whatever it was, the fuel was always wood. And what did they do with the wood ashes every morning? They throw them in the recycling bin to save the earth. Where did the wood ashes go? They went into the garden. Wood ashes aren't ashes. 95% to 98% of the wood ashes are really minerals that the tree sucked up out of the ground. When you burnt the wood, that powder that's left is minerals. Sometimes it's a little gray or black because there's some carbon left over, but 95 to 98% of what we would call wood ashes are really minerals that the tree had sucked up out of the ground. We threw it in the garden, and everybody knew it increased the fertility. You had better yield, and your gardens did better when you put wood ashes in there. But what they didn't know, and yet today they don't know, and I'm depending on all of you to share this information, what they didn't know and they don't know today is those plants sucked up those minerals. When you ate the pumpkins and the squash and the okra and the tomatoes and the bell peppers, and you ate the potatoes and the onions and the peas and beans and lentils and corn that were grown there, they sucked up all those minerals. And that's how you got your minerals. You didn't know you were getting your nutritional minerals that way, but you did. This remained the same for thousands and thousands and thousands of years until 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Monday, September 4th, 1882. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Monday, September 4th, 1882, on Pearl Street in New York City, on the bluff overlooking the construction of the Brooklyn Bridge, it all ended in a single heartbeat. We know this because the story was in every newspaper in the world. This fellow here, Thomas Edison, pulled the switch on the first commercial electric generating plant. Within 10 years, every industrialized nation, including the United States, every town and every city and every industrialized nation converted from wood as the universal fuel to electricity. Here comes the ultimate question. How many wood ashes are left over in your home every morning when you use electricity to fuel your home? Zero. Zero. Now, nobody knew what was happening. They still don't. And again, the most fertile and the most valuable farmland in the world thousands of years ago and yet today are floodplains, because every spring it would flood, and as the water would recede, it would leave silt and mud behind, minerals, if you will, from mountains hundreds or maybe thousands of miles upstream. And people like this, of course, they'd plow this in and renew the mineral content of the soil, because when you have minerals in the food, it's because the plants are pulling minerals out of the soil. They don't know it, they don't need it, they only need 3, but they'll take up anything that's soluble in the soil. People liked it. Guess what? Today we have 900,000 dams for hydroelectric power. 900,000 dams for hydroelectric power. And of course, there was an unintended consequence, flood control. Now, people thought that was good at first. They didn't realize that we destroyed the earth with flood control, because there's no renewal of the minerals in the soil, the farmlands, or the plains, or where it was flooding, the valleys. And we've shut off the food supply to ourselves. We've shut off our minerals for ourselves, as you'll see in a moment. We have exact numbers by the U.S. Department of Agriculture. So things are happening. It's all negative because we've dammed up the rivers. We've cut off the food supply to our farms. We've cut off the food supply to the ocean. It's over 100 feet deep of minerals that have piled up since they built the Hoover Dam. Nutritional minerals do not occur in a uniform blanket around the crust of the earth. Nutritional minerals occur in veins like chocolate and chocolate ripple ice cream. Some places have little, some places have none, some places have 3 minerals, some places have 15, some places have 25, some places have 40. But you can see from this picture, which is a satellite picture from 100 miles up, that the different colors and the swirls and whirls represent different minerals and different combinations of minerals. So in the animal industry, so every dairy cow is eating hay or beans, soybeans grown in this area, we would put a supplement of vitamins and minerals in their alfalfa pellets, maybe grown there, or their soybeans grown there. So we put the vitamins and minerals in their food, so we're leveling the playing field. So every dairy cow, no matter what part of that picture she got her food from, she's going to give us a maximum yield, say 1.5 gallons of milk, instead of 10% of the cows giving a pint and 20% giving a quart, instead of all 100% giving 1.5 gallons. It's predictable. It's also very nutritional, because a lot of these minerals appear in the milk if they're there. If they're not there, obviously the cow can't make them. Now, this is what makes longevity unique. This is a compost pile. This compost pile goes back into prehistoric days. It's made out of 100% green leafy plants. We know this because of the chloroplast, the little chlorophyll structures inside of plants, green leafy things. And they contain 78 minerals, all 60 essential minerals in optimal amounts. These people are standing on a road that's 3,000-foot elevation above sea level. That white cap on this deposit is 15 to 25 foot thick, and it represents a cap of marine limestone. So obviously it was under the sea for thousands and thousands and thousands of years to make this limestone. And there's 100 cubic miles of this stuff here in this deposit, 100 cubic miles. We know this from drillings and soundings because, oh gosh, 50, 75 years ago, people are looking for oil, they're looking for coal, they're looking for natural gas in these places, and they said, what is this stuff? This isn't what we're looking for, and they just deserted it. Of course, this is something that is incorporated into our 90 essential nutrients, getting the 60 essential minerals from this deposit. We knew in 1936 our soil was depleted of minerals. This is U.S. Senate document 264, and it was a 2-year hearings done by the U.S. Senate to determine why our soils were dead. Why did we have the Dust Bowl? Why did we have the Great Depression? They blamed it on depletion of minerals in the soil in 1936, but nobody proposed the reason why our soil was depleted. If you ask even yet today, environmentalists, professors of agriculture at big agricultural universities, you ask them, why is our soil so depleted of minerals? They'll always say because of poor farming practices, because of poor farming practices. That's not true. Nothing has changed as far as farming practices. We plow, we plant, we harvest. We plow, we plant, we harvest. And so what is it? Well, no more wood ashes in the gardens, no more silt from floods, and we've cut off the food supply to our land. We've cut off the food supply to our oceans. That's why we're in trouble. This is one that really disturbs me. Our baby food, according to the Food Chemistry Journal, which comes out every month, I read it faithfully every month, and this one came out April 16, 2012. They looked at the top ate baby formulas from the standpoint of pollution and from nutritional value. And they said, these baby formulas, we're talking about Enfamil, Similac, Gerber's, ones you're very familiar with, very well respected. These baby foods contain less than 20% of the required nutrients needed for proper development of our babies. We're talking about 20% of the minerals and vitamins our babies need is all you're going to get in giving them these baby foods. If you don't supplement, you're going to wind up burying them like Joe Biden buried his son, Bo. Steve Jobs' mother buried him, and Iwata's mother buried him. Okay, you're going to wind up burying your children if you don't supplement them because it's not in the food anymore, even from the very beginning. Okay, these baby formulas. You must supplement. We do it in animals, we got great results. We have to do it in people. We're going to have to do this. The government has failed us, and guess what? The medical system has failed us terribly, and somebody needs to go to jail. This is a 100-year study from 1914 to 2014. And of course, they referred back to U.S. Senate Document 264, published in 1936. Our farm soils are depleted of vital minerals, and as a result, our foods are literally starved of nutrition. Medicine cannot compensate for this deficiency. U.S. Senate Document 264, 1936. And the minerals in our soil over the past 100 years, 1914 to 2014, have been depleted by 85%. You can see the chart and the graph on the right. You can see the extreme dip in the mineral values of our soil. Okay? Then in the bottom line, and again, this comes from last year, 2014, USDA, the United States Department of Agriculture, reports that 95% of all Americans are minerally deficient. What more do you need? What more do you need to understand that you must supplement? No matter how well you eat, you're a billionaire, it doesn't matter, you're an athlete, it doesn't matter. If you're a farmer, it doesn't matter. If you don't supplement, you're in trouble. Worse yet, if you don't supplement and supplement your children are in trouble. Remember, the experts are saying that our children will be the first generation of Americans that do not live as long as their parents. To me, that's very, very scary, but we have the power, we have the knowledge to fix this. But we're going to have to be very proactive here because the government's not going to do it, and guess what? The doctors aren't going to do it. I want you to look at these maps of the United States again, but I want you to look at the demographics here. Look at the worst of the worst. And here, the dark blue, okay? This is disability rates. Look at the dark blue ones, which is the worst of the worst. 31% in the dark blue states of disability. Look at this one. And this one, you look at this one, this is the heart age compared to the actual chronological age. The ones in the dark burgundy are the worst of the worst. Same demographic. Look at this one. Heart disease, same demographic. Southeastern states, the old Confederate states, the states in the Great Lakes area and west of the Mississippi River, the Indian reservations in the Northwest and the Southwest. Okay, and now we're going to look at cancer. Same thing, old Confederate states, the states around the Great Lakes and the Northwest and the Southwest where the Indian reservations are. Eastern seaboard, worst of the worst. Life expectancy, as you would expect, with all these terrible diseases being the worst in those places, same demographics. The blue areas, this is by county, actually live 25 years longer than the ones in the orange and the yellow and the red, both in the old Confederate states, the Great Lakes areas, out west, Northwest, and the Indian reservations in the Southwest. This is both for males and females. Your body has the ability to rebuild itself. Your body wants to heal itself, but you have to give it raw materials for that to happen. You cannot build a house without brick and mortar. You cannot build a house without roofing shingles. You cannot build a house without wood for framing and infrastructure. You need nails and screws and bolts and nuts. Okay, same way with our body. You may have the best genes in the world, but without the 90 essential nutrients, as they say in France, there ain't nothing going to happen. Okay? And so I just hope you remember the fact that we have less than 20% of the nutrients necessary in our baby foods. Our kids' generation will be the first generation in America that do not live as long as their parents. It's not a genetic thing. It's not destined. But if you don't supplement them, that prediction will come true. So I urge you to give everybody you know for birthdays, holidays, anytime a present's due, for graduations in schools and so forth, getting married, getting engaged, going out together on a regular basis. Give them the 90 essential nutrients. And our babies will be born normal. People will live a long time. Your kids will outlive you, which is the way it's supposed to be. And I want to thank you for being such a great audience. Contact your Youngevity associate and find out how you get involved. Become part of the Youngevity Nation. And we're going to save America. Even more important than that, with this information, we can save the world. And God bless you.